I am super excited for today. It's the first of a series of virtual workshops that we have been doing about AI, and we are looking at AI in a perspective that these kinds of transformative technologies affect everybody, every sector. Whether you are a student preparing for work or you are in work, you are going to be impacted by AI. And we want to create the spaces of conversation where we can intersect. So industry and community-based organizations and educators and government leaders in one space, learning and exchanging information and doing some of this sense making. And so we had an opportunity to do some of this with an AI expo in August, and we were in person. And hopefully some of you were there for that. I know not all of you. And then this virtual learning series is a way for us to be able to continue that. We've been really intentional about pulling in cross-sector representation, since AI is transforming medicine and agriculture and energy and so many other industries that are important here in Washington and across the state and across the nation, across the globe. So I want to welcome you on behalf of NCW Tech Alliance. This series is being sponsored also by aiEDU, and we'll have an opportunity to hear a little bit from Lindsay Berger as part of today's session. We also have with us Dr. Adam Carewe, and we'll get started here with him in just a second. And back with us today is Carl Sweetland, who's also going to be sharing some resources. And so we have an action-packed 90 minutes for you. While we're having the conversation about who's here today, let's get interactive. So about half of you are educators and business and industry representatives. We've got some community-based organizations, some tribal entrepreneur community leaders, a few of you who none of these categories fit, or you're something else entirely. You're all welcome. So I want to take a moment to tell you about, as we get going, the resources that we're sharing today. We'll have some podcast thought leadership, some classroom-ready resources, some frameworks, and some strategies that we're unpacking today. What we've done is try to dock those in the AI in Action landing page. So on this page that is with the QR code or the URL that's now on your screen, you'll be able to find our toolbox. And we'll be adding to that as we go through the series. So you'll find a link, for example, to Adam's blog on the toolbox, so you can follow along with him today. You'll find slides from our AI Expo presentations, the aiEDU framework, along with some other resources and research as it's coming across to us. We're posting it to that page. So bookmark that page and head there as if it's a toolbox made for you. Okay. And with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and get us started with our first segment today. Now, one of the reasons that we're starting with Dr. Carewe is medicine is actually one of those places and one of those spaces that's at the front line of technology adoption. Time and time again, the medical system and the way that they adopt technology informs education, it informs government practice. There is a really complex system, and some are small systems, some are large systems. Each state may do things a little bit different. And so it's almost like an ecosystem as you go across medical, the medical administration. Even though the goal is the same in terms of patient care, medical practices resemble some of the other complex systems that are grappling with technology adoption. And so it's a really interesting opportunity for us to go into the front lines of that technology adoption and see what's the experience look like there. Where's their innovation happening? How is that innovation being received by that system? And one of the leaders who's at the forefront of some of the thinking that's happening nationally is Dr. Adam Carewe. He's here today joining us from Colorado, and I'm going to have you listen to him. I'll have him tell his story a bit about his journey into this innovator space. But some of the things that he's been publishing and the thinking that he is doing is helping to shape the national thoughts on AI in medicine and some of the ways where it could be transformational in the way that we're providing care for patients. So with that, please help me welcome Dr. Adam Carewe.
Thanks, Sue. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
You want me to kick off with a little intro?
Yeah, if you would, can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, so I've kind of spent like my career straddling kind of two worlds. Obviously, I'm a physician, so taking care of patients, and I've continued to do that through all of it. But I've also had a big role in in trying to help design systems and optimizations in healthcare. So both for providers and the kind of systems and the back end systems themselves. And so living in both these spaces shows you really this gap between kind of what patients need and what our systems ultimately deliver. And that gap, as well as when ChatGPT was released back in 2022, really kind of pulled me into exploring how AI could really help healthcare. So, as a clinician, I've been practicing family physician and informaticist, and I I started at Kaiser Permanente in Colorado, and started out in the clinics, and ultimately became the chief medical informatics officer, which you can kind of think is the person that's the kind of partner with the chief information officer for like a traditional kind of company. So wear a big technology hat, but then also obviously have the clinical hat. Um, and so kind of like what we were seeing, was, physicians, we were spending much more time typing than we were talking to patients. And, we tried different new systems. We tried training optimizations, making templates, macros. We even did a 2.5-day offsite for our physician group to train them on the workflows and tools. And, it was really helpful, but there was a lot of friction, obviously. And, doctors were left doing a lot of their documentation and work outside of hours, which we use the term pajama time in healthcare for that. But at Kaiser, we piloted these ambient AI companies pretty early. And in early 2024, we tried one, and we kind of immediately saw this shift. Not for everyone, but for the people clearly that loved this. Doctors were able to kind of look away from the computer, look patients in the eye, and by the end of the visit, about 80 to 90% of their documentation and tasks for that visit were kind of done. And physicians can say, "I finally feel like I'm a doctor again." And so that kind of shaped everything. And as Sue mentioned, alongside my clinical and this CMIO work, I co-founded NerdMDs, which is a company that my buddy and I, Dale Gold, started. And it started out with us just blogging on healthcare. See you in the screen. And what was going to be happening, and what we were thinking about. And over time, it evolved into a Substack that I have called Brewski.com, and that was the link I think Sue was mentioning. And ultimately, it launched into a podcast. And we initially focused this podcast on these AI vendors in the healthcare space, so in the clinical space, because we wanted to talk to those founders and folks that were doing this. So kind of, I guess, fast forward to last year about this time in August 2024, I joined a startup. So I left Kaiser, and I joined a startup called General Medicine. It's a telemedicine marketplace company. And when I joined that, it was like super, super early. They were still kind of in a very stealthy mode. And, I really wanted to move to something that was like a clean slate, a chance to design, from the ground up. And I think traditional telemedicine even was, pretty good at some things. But, I think the experience for a lot of people was just very transactional and didn't really feel like, kind of a traditional type of way. And so, at General Medicine, that's what we've built over the last year is, these custom tools that really allow the clinician to have a rich kind of context of what the patient is concerned about. So they get a really good intake of digested information, and different things will carry forward from past visits and other aspects of the chart. So the clinician starts the kind of encounter with this patient with really great information in front. And so, I guess the last thing I'll say is what really drives me, and you'll probably hear this today, is kind of curiosity. I've always encouraged my teams to ask questions, really ask, why are we still doing this way? And really that's where I've seen a lot of this progress, a lot of these things progress this way. So I I think my biggest thing I'll just wrap with is like my journey has kind of been moving from kind of optimizing this old process or like the system to trying to amplify these new ideas in public, through blogging and also building these new models from scratch. And so hopefully, yeah, some of the stuff we chat about this afternoon will bring that to light.
Well, thank you it takes a lot of courage to be thinking out loud in a room full of people with, especially with something like AI. And it's so new, and you're bold in the way that you call out some opportunities and some predictions. And so it was a lot of fun to put together some questions for you because there's so much material to learn and listen and lean into. And I think I'll start really at like where you sit right now. I would call the leading edge in the ways that you're thinking and trying to be innovative and transformative. And that's often a place where medicine takes folks, is to that transformative leading edge, sometimes called the bloody leading edge for a reason.
Yeah.
Maybe there's too much pun in medicine. I don't know about that. But from where you sit from that vantage point, what's something that you think others should be thinking and talking about right now? What advice would you have for folks who are thinking about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, kind of big picture where I sit, I think one of the most important things is to not think of just a shiny AI tool itself, but how kind of your work and things could be redesigned around it. And so, I think like healthcare learned this the hard way back in the day with the electronic health record. We bolted a lot of new technology into just old processes, basically paper processes, and created more burden, not less. And I think there's a lot of different phrases that are used, but like not automating like friction, like trying to reimagine the workflow. And sometimes that's referred to as the faster horse problem with AI, because we just think of all these things that are like annoying in our workflow, and we're like, oh, AI can just make that faster. But I think you really want to try to think about the whole thing. I think the second thing to really think about in this space is trust. AI is most powerful when it kind of disappears into the background, like an assistant, and, just quietly handling different aspects, so humans can focus on the human part. I mentioned as a doctor, like being with that patient and talking with them is the part that physicians really love. And so AI is really, really powerful though when it is helpful, and it also kind of disappears. So both people don't even really know it's happening. And then I think the third thing would be kind of culture. People resist new tools not because they're specifically anti-technology. I think people resist them because it adds work a lot of the times instead of removing it. And so I think with AI, if you can start to show them that, have this one clear win, that one thing will make their day just a little bit tangibly better, and it'll allow that adoption to kind of spread naturally. So really, I think it's like about kind of designing those things so really the human parts can really shine through.
I think that's really, really wise. I think you've described in some of your blog posts that AI in medicine is going to be a TurboTax moment. A TurboTax is not where my mind would have taken that. But what does that say about your mindset and how you're thinking about, and what mindset and conditions are there behind making these kinds of jumps in adoption of technology possible?
Yeah, no, it's funny. Honestly, like, I think what I was referring to about the TurboTax moment is how like TurboTax didn't change the tax code. Like we obviously have the same rules, but it changed it changed our experience of navigating it. And some people still obviously don't just even do their taxes. They hire someone else to do, which is totally fine. But those that like to do it themselves, TurboTax was like really an unlock. And it took something super painful, repetitive, and made it real simple, guided, and very, very fast. And I think that's like what's happening kind of in the space of AI in healthcare. And I think there's like, let's say there's like two or three things that like kind of I think need to be in place for this leap to really be successful. And one of them is like there has to be real pain in like the current status quo. And no one's going to adopt a new tool just because it's like shiny, like I kind of mentioned in the beginning. And in healthcare, I think the pain of it is like that, healthcare providers and other clinicians, they spend lots and lots of hours lost to just doing administrative and documentation tasks. I think secondly, the trade-off has to be super clear. Like obviously the TurboTax trade-off was pretty obvious. There's less paperwork, fewer mistakes, like kind of more confidence because it walked you through. And clinically integrated AI tools for clinicians also do that same thing and kind of help give back that time, so they can focus on their patient. And I'll mention this a couple times, but I always mention trust because that's like paramount for this. Is like people won't leap into something new unless they believe it won't fail them. And that you have to build confidence over time with that, step by step. So I think, I guess summarize that, I mentioned like kind of the leap happens really, I think, when there's pain, clarity, and trust. And once that happens, the speed of adoption, will typically surprise everyone.
These are the enabling conditions. What's really powerful about what you're saying is it's really easy for me to, as somebody who works alongside educators, to make some transference over to other professions, whether it's, small government or educators or, a public utility where that administrative burden, it keeps you from being able to do some of the other parts that are the human services. So there's some parallels in what you're speaking about there with your three leveraged enabling conditions there. I'm going to take this a slightly different direction and ask you about, there are some practices that are just ready to be retired. You actually wrote about, I think it's charting, that you were saying, the traditional charting, it's maybe time to just put that to bed. When do you know that it's a process that just needs to be hung up and we have to start from the ground on how we do this thing? How are you deliberating to decide whether
Yeah,
to
no, I think,
innovate or scrap it?
yeah, no, I mean, so I wrote about something like a long time ago, and this was way pre AI. It was a post. It's actually one of our first, kind of, I think it was one of our first posts on the NerdMDs blog, but it was, I called it "Do Not Resuscitate Death of Traditional Charting." And that's because at that point, we're starting to try to reimagine the way clinicians would document inside a computer system. And obviously, AI has kind of changed a lot of this, but what I argued then is kind of, I think, still true now, that we were treating the electronic health record just like a sleek electronic version of an old paper chart, with tabs, notes, progress updates, that sort of thing. And so I think the challenge that people have is like when you keep layering technology on top of kind of old or paper era design, you create drag instead of progress, right? And I mentioned before, like we tried to train these doctors and give them tools in the EHR and things to help. And those are all incrementally helped, but it never, started to really try to solve kind of the core issues. And, so that's why I called it the DNR of chart. So, DNR is obviously a term for someone when they don't want to be resuscitated if they were in a condition that they weren't able to return. But, I think a lot of times, like you have to be brave and just kind of acknowledge that a process has outlived its purpose, and that's, so I think one of the things I always have stressed is like, don't be afraid to declare something is done. If the process was designed for yesterday's needs, like think about how you could redesign it for today with, these amazing tools that are, coming about in our lives. And, I think so. Yeah, I'd just say kind of like a bold move of this is like giving yourself permission to sunset something and really build something new. And AI really gives us those tools to make that possible now.
I wonder if you can give us a peek if charting was reimagined entirely. Do you have a vision of what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I think like ideally, I think any clinician or someone who does any sort of conversational piece to their work, I mean, if it's anything that needs to be like noted and documented and captured somewhere, like what people, what I think charting, what people really want is you want to understand what the patient's concern is. You want to have a conversation about that and what needs to kind of be done for that concern. And then you want to have like this plan afterwards for immediate and then, follow up. And ideally, like that should all be able to be done like through, I think, really intelligent intake um, and 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 AI stuff synthesizing all that and creating the output. So like essentially as a doctor, you don't have to like touch anything. Like it's just the conversation and the actions, would kind of turn into that. And I mean, I think we'll get there. We're obviously not there yet, but I think that's where these tools are evolving.
I think that's a pretty powerful vision. I think it kind of goes along with, you have described scribes as maybe being that invisible helper, some kind of tech that disappears in the background. Is that kind of what you're thinking in terms of,
Yeah. No,
so
absolutely. Yeah. Right now, that is the use case that everyone is, starting to latch onto is, yeah, just hearing the conversation and just like the way, an AI can listen to notes of or a conversation in a meeting and kind of generate a bunch of, synthesis of notes and action items. That's essentially what it can do for clinical as well.
yeah, it's really powerful. Well, so take me back in terms of the mindset and the culture piece. And you've been really candid about sometimes the thing that pumps the brakes in that technology adoption is old culture. And it is, definitely present in healthcare. It's present in other sectors as well. So as somebody
Yeah.
who's working on influencing change, what patterns do you see in the way that people are adopting technology and how are you working around those patterns to shift the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think like resistance to tech in general is rarely about the tech itself. It's usually about the history, I would say. And so in healthcare, people weren't, maybe like thinking, oh, I don't want to deal with AI because they hated innovation. They were really kind of rejecting it initially or like having skeptical of it because it already lived through a bunch of pain, the electronic health records as the primary example. Because that just added clicks and added steps and even tools like voice recognition, dictation, those helped, but like they never quite worked perfectly. And so I think there's another aspect to this though too, especially inside organizations that have been around a long time. Many of these kind of legacy kind of systems and organizations, they were built and championed by people inside the organization too. And these tools became part of their individual identity, the company's identity, and asking them to give up on that for something else is like asking them to let go of their own work. And so I think like change can threaten not just processes but also pride a little bit in these things that people have built. And so I think a lot of times you hear the thing like people be like, "Oh, here we go again." This is we've already solved this before, and we're just kind of recreating the wheel. But I think those kind of comments I think come from some of that kind of older culture part, which is tough. It's tough to get people along, but it's I think what shifts this is not like a big speech. It's kind of like I mentioned before, these like small wins. If you can actually show people um, that's the way it can really transfer. And I have a story. When I was at Kaiser and we rolled out these ambient kind of AI scribes, there was a pediatric clinic that was very just known to be kind of pretty resistant to any kind of change. But they had one doctor there that was like very technology focused, so he started using it, and there's about 14 of them, and all it took was like for him to use it and kind of show one colleague, and it just like bubbled out. And pretty soon all 14 of those physicians within a matter of like a week, they all were using it and like singing the praises. So I think I think culture kind of shifts really from that proof that there's this value, and your colleagues can be really persuasive and helpful in that process as well.
And it speaks to a little bit of some of the, you were talking at the beginning about building that trust and building that transition and finding early wins in the folks that are early adopters. Um, I think one of my absolute favorite things that you've written is actually part of your article where you were talking about your Tesla
Yeah,
and how, well, I'm going to murder this in terms of the paraphrase, but I'll give it a
that's
try.
okay.
How it's actually gotten value and new features since you drove it off the lot almost a decade ago, and continues to have operationally some things that it can do that it couldn't do then. And so it's different than what we might think of as a vehicle that we buy and it depreciates. And I'm curious from that, like the Tesla iteration sort of standpoint, how you're seeing that technology adoption in medicine and how the static parts or the parts that are fixed and the parts that are adaptive might give us insights about where AI is going to be really helpful or transformative.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like, the big thing I think I would say is like transformation happens when systems are built for change and not for kind of control. And yeah, I tried to write that piece because like I think everyone could understand, my Tesla Model 3 is a 2018 car, and like that's not an old car, but like, in like technology standards, we're in 2025. So it is old, but that car has like just gotten better and better with software, um, and so I think like medicine itself, I think is hopefully I think is moving that same way. It's moving to more of like a kind of precision type of screening that really flips the traditional kind of medicine model from more reactive to truly proactive. And I think you want to, obviously you want to catch risks before they're crises, and you actually really truly want to prevent things. So I think the connection is like in medicine is this like moving from reactive to proactive. And I think where AI will be able to really help us is instead of waiting for like the early signs to show, it'll actually anticipate the people that are at risk for these things and try and surface that right data at the right time. um, I think like, I mean, I give this example a lot in everyday life, but like, where AI is going to, I think, help us is in simple things too, like most of us have like similar kind of grocery habits. Most of us like make similar type meals at home if you cook at home. And so you're kind of always generating like a shopping list and thinking of groceries. But like, I mean, AI could technically probably do all of that if it just knew our history and everything. And then every week an allotment of groceries could end up delivered right on your front door. So I think another way is like kind of more generic to precise in healthcare. No more of this like one size fits all. So tools that really kind of tune your individual context as a patient. And then moving kind of from standalone stuff to more kind of system level things. And this is more of that connection like with the Tesla car. It was kind of built with cameras and all these sensors and different things, being ready for this. And so it won't just be like a one little tiny piece on it or one little clever app that we have now. It'll be this entire like ecosystem that's going to continuously get smarter in the background and evolve and get better and better. And that's the stuff that's really excited me about this startup I've been a part of last year is building things in that way.
It's sometimes just a lot of fun to hear you speak about these things. And I think, some of the things that you've just even in a flow of consciousness, you say brilliant things like it will take us from moving from a reactive into a proactive space. And some of that adoption, I think that's the mindset, that innovator mindset that allows you to look at a system where we've been doing things the same way for a long time. And rather than remaking that same process, only with new tools and technology, you can really reimagine how care might look different and move into a space with more agency for both the provider and the patient. I think that's something that should resonate across our sectors. Regardless
Yeah,
of what you're doing, you want to be able to be a little bit more responsive. I'm going to ask one more question. Actually, I'm looking over the questions that came in on our
sure.
month meter for you.
Yeah,
And it looks like there's a couple of questions here that are, pretty specific about some of the cautions and concerns, whether it's confidentiality for patients or insurance. And, folks have some understandable concerns about, AI missing something like an anomaly. There's just like, what if it doesn't work? And what do you do when you're approaching some of these criticisms? Because I'm sure you hear them often.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of the same thing. I'll give the analogy to like autonomous cars, right? I mean, people, I think we're much more critical of something when it's a machine that's kind of helping to do things. We're much less critical of humans. I think that actually make very similar mistakes. And it's like okay. I mean, I think like, I think a good example is when we rolled out these AI scribes. I mean, people were like nitpicking the output of these, like down to the word, like, oh no, this wasn't the exact like kind of word that was said that referenced something. But like, if you look at like a chart of a clinician who like types it all out, it'll be riddled with like small errors and hopefully not any big ones. But so I think, I agree. I mean, trust, I mentioned trust, and trust like is both on kind of the patient consumer side and also the clinical side, medical side. And so these tools have to be extremely trustworthy and they have to be very reliable. And yeah, the fidelity for them to make any sort of mistake in healthcare is the bar is much higher than anywhere else.
Well, there's some pretty big transitions happening in medicine. We have to close our time for today, but I'll
Yeah,
invite folks to find the link to your blog on our toolbox, and
yeah.
to continue to think and read alongside as you're thinking. Do you have any last words for us? I'll ask, the final question is just, if you were king for a day and you could have everyone reimagining one part of AI, what would it be? What would you have us think about differently?
Yeah, I mean, I actually have been kind of writing about this recently, so I think it's really relevant to this conversation. But I think if you take any kind of one step tomorrow with this, is look for what I call like a loop in your work that could be closed. And I
Mm.
think if you can find that loop, that's where AI can really help. So I think just look for those. The thing that about these tools is you really just have to apply it to what your end kind of desire is. So yeah, that would be my word of wisdom is look for that loop in the workflow that if it was closed, it would give back time for that piece of work that really matters to you
Small
as a human.
moments. Yeah, small moments.
Yep.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming and for sharing your thinking with us, and keep doing what you're doing because it really is shaping a national conversation about the way we're thinking about and imagining AI.
Yeah, you bet, Sue. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Well, we will be transitioning here. And so next up, we'll have, we'll throw our Mentimeter slides back up here for a second. And we are going to welcome our next speaker, who Carl Sweetland is the founder and principal strategist for TechBridge 360. He joined us in person at the AI Expo and shared some practical learning for us and some skills. So as we transition into this next segment, I'll invite Carl.
Yep, I'm here.
All right. And I will hand over to you on this one.
Wonderful. Well, I'll introduce myself briefly. So I'm an educator by training, taught third and fourth grade way back in the early 90s, and then jumped over to paint and spent the next 20 years going from paint clerk to CIO for Kelly Paint Company. So during that time, I spent a lot of time in operational technology, both in manufacturing and retail. After that, I jumped over to Bellevue School District, led their IT group, actually put together a more modern IT structure there, and then went and worked for Microsoft. In the last 10 years, I spent most of my time in the educational and state and local government space and some nonprofit, talking mostly all things Microsoft, but lately it's been really, really heavy in AI and the subtopic of generative AI. So when Sue asked me if I could take 15 minutes today and talk through a topic, I thought, 15 minutes might be a perfect time to go back in time and just ground everybody in really what generative AI is. And so that is today's topic. And so all systems go. And yesterday I published a white paper just basically summarizing what we're going to be talking today. And in it, I really use kind of that AI control room. You know, when we first walk into a large, massive control room, there's a lot of gauges and dashboards and levers and buttons. And it's just like, wow, this is a little bit overwhelming. But if we can use that framework to start making sense of it, I thought that might be a good analogy to help. And so started building that. So I'm going to use two analogies today. One is that, and then another that we all know quite well is the quick brown fox. And I've got an interesting takeaway on that as we go through this presentation. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, which I think is one of the polls. So if everyone can quickly think through what happens when you type a prompt. And then Sue, when you have a quorum, you can let me know.
Looks like we've got about half so far.
Okay.
But we're getting there. All right, I think we're pretty close.
Awesome. Well, I'll go ahead and reveal the answer. So what ChatGPT or any generative AI is really doing is it really truly is just predicting the next word. It's not searching real time of the internet necessarily. Sometimes it does. It does report back facts, but things are really already stored. And so it's using what's probably the right fact to reveal. And sadly, it doesn't really understand meaning. It only understands how words are associated to words. And so let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you. So it's not retrieving at all. What happens is the different companies that have their models, and OpenAI is the one that ChatGPT and Microsoft both use, is it's gone out and harvested all the written material that is available in the open web. Copyright becomes an issue, but it goes and looks at all the blog posts and textbooks and any other digitalized materials that it has access to. And it puts it into its system so we can refer to and learn how words are associated to it. And basically breaks those down into tokens. And we'll go a little more into tokens in a minute. But so if we use the quick brown fox as an example, the quick brown fox are all tokens are now stored and mapped into the model, into the large language model, so they can tie references or relationships to that. So if we type in a search, we could say, you know, the quick brown fox, and we might get a response, leap gracefully in search of shelter. Or maybe we're thinking more on the security lens and we've had some inference about security. We could start thinking about the sneakiness of the fox. Or we're talking about, you know, clever or resistance, and you know, we're studying World War II, and we had some reference there, and we had that, oh, clever resistance of the fox. And so what the AI model is really doing is it's just trying to pull parallels into what it already knows. And as we go through this, I'll talk more about how that works. So let's go ahead and switch next slide. So large language models. So if we think about all the books that are out there, all the materials that we can train on, the different companies have some with more ethices than others. I believe Claude recently was in the news. Claude is one of the large language models out there used by Perplexity. I think they got caught because they actually pulled in copyrighted material. And I know a lot of people get concerned about, hey, can I even use this material that it's providing me? And the answer is most of the time, yes. It is basically taking all these words and indexing them into a semantic layer. And then upon your request or your prompting, it's going and pulling those back out and providing that to you in the word order that it thinks makes the most sense. So things that will affect the output will be the tone that you give it, the length of the prompt that you provide. So if you just simply type in, tell me about foxes, it might tell you that, oh, they are a mammal. They generally live in these type of regions. But if you say, hey, tell me about foxes and their diets, in particular, what type of predators do they have? Then we've given it a lot more meaning, and it can come back and start giving us a lot more information about the fox. Let's go ahead and switch slides. So this question is thinking about how many dimensions. If we think, X and Y is 2 dimensions, and as the token fox is being stored into the large language model, we have X, Y, Z would be 3 dimensions. Or is it 50 different dimensions? Or 300 different dimensions? Or 1,536 dimensions? And we can probably, it looks like, and as we've all done our multiple guess quizzes throughout, there's kind of a tail there, right? One's very specific. 1,536 different dimensions is the correct one. And at first I was thinking about some graphic that might even possibly show what that looks like, and I couldn't come up with one. But when we think about how Fox is embedded out there, it gets stored, and I'm jumping ahead into embedding, so I'll just focus on tokens today. So every single written material that the learning model has been exposed to, all the words, subwords, punctuation marks have been stored into, and you can go ahead and switch the slides. So all the different words and subwords have been stored into a token. So over on the right-hand side, I've got, 4 words there: dog, puppy, fox, cat. And sampling of what their vector slice might look like. Now I'm only giving you 5 of the 1,536 different vector numbers. But the large language model ends up going and using these numbers to determine how close something is to another. And so when we take the sentence, the quick brown fox, that could be 4 or up to 5 tokens, depending if there's a punctuation mark or not. Sometimes, though, it will use, like, the word unbreakable gets broken to actually 3 tokens, unbreakable. And then it's able to start using that as a comparison for the word patterns. At the bottom of the slide, when you look at the slides later, there is a tokenizer. You can actually start typing in your own words and see. And this is the one that OpenAI is using. It's interesting. I don't think that it's super informative, but when you start trying to understand how these generative AI tools work, and then thinking about how you might use them in your work, it's important. So let's start talking about embedding. So if we can go to the next slide. And so all these tokens are stored simply just as numbers in the schema. It's not the words is stored, but the number patterns. And so when the fox is set up into a token, and then it goes and looks in the model, it starts discovering that, hey, it's close to a wolf and a dog. It may be close to a cat, but when you start thinking about dogs and cats, they're closer to domestic, whereas the fox is closer to wild. The other example on here, banks is financial. I used to, when I do real-time, not off-slide examples, I like to use, what is an elephant, and watch it build out. And as you start asking more questions, you say, well, hey, could my tundra pull the elephant? And while elephants live on, in tundra, the AI is able to model is, something that could pull tundra, a tundra truck is closer to something that pulls than tundra on the ground. And so the AI model is able to quickly shift to say, when we start talking about pulling, here's the weight, and the weight of an elephant is X, and the ability is Y, and it's can then begin to start answering those questions based off of just word patterns. Is this one greater than another? And then that also becomes part of the differentiator of how the model is working. And next slide. In the beginning time, so you have different models. ChatGPT is one I think that most people are familiar with. Perplexity. Microsoft has a handful, all called Copilot, so that tends to be a little bit confusing. I generally use the Copilot built into Edge. It's free, and I can use it as much as I want without hitting any barriers. But the retrieval augmented generation was a term that bubbled up. So if you were back in about a year and a half ago, we were doing a demonstration, and I was asking about financial information of the current year. If I was to ask that question in ChatGPT, it would come back and say, my large language model only goes back to, and the last time I did this, it was like October of 2023. But if I did it in Microsoft's Copilot and Edge, it would go and pull current data, but then look at old reports and put it in that format. And that's the retrieval augmented generation. So let's take a framework of something that we knew in the past. Let's go and look for that reference stored material that we have. Remember, this stuff is always looking and indexing what's on the web. And then let's pull that back into something meaningful. The other part that's really important is if you're saying, hey, I've got this lesson plan that I like to use, but I need to add something about X. So retrieval augmented generation can be taking something that you have, loading it in, letting the model go ahead and break that apart, look at what other information it has stored in this large language model, and then pull that back and put it in a new framing. I do this all the time whenever I landed my son a great job at Pet Boys, and he didn't quite have the experience he needed, but the resume that he presented was accurate, but also written in a great way that landed him that material. And we're able to provide some background of what made him him, and also had the engine ask him a few questions before it created the materials. Let's go ahead to the next slide. This is going to be just a word mapping. So I love this. This is probably the best use of this to go into the next slide. So we certainly have a lot of different associations with what Fox is. And I think this plays really well into generative AI and how it puts out materials. You can definitely get it to provide you the output you want depending on what you put in, but it also talks about the biases that are built into the models. So, using our quick brown fox, it's clever and sly. These are all different things that we could project that might come out of it. But probably what's even more meaningful, and where I spend a lot of time talking about the biases and behaviors, is first in the learning of the LLMs, as they are gathering all the written materials around the world. There is definitely, and I think most of us in nonprofit and education know the term the global South. And so if we think about sub-Saharan Africa or South and Southeast Asia and Latin America, there's a lot of languages that are not written. Or if we start thinking about the indigenous and minority languages worldwide in North America, Australia, Oceania, and in Europe, none of that material is put in there. So as we start asking questions, it's definitely going to present us with some biases that we may not be aware of. If we're thinking about, I'm going to use this to help write some policies, I may need to provide a lot more information about some of the needs of the global South if my policy is going to reflect in that area. Another interesting side note, as these companies are building their models, they certainly do a lot of testing to make sure that they're eliminating as much bias as possible. But an early example that Microsoft stumbled into is they built a simple AI tool. So this isn't generative AI, but this is AI related. And the tool was a wolf versus dog classifier. And they would simply just put in images and have it identify whether it was a wolf or a dog. And what they found is it worked really well in the Southern Hemisphere. But in the Northern Hemisphere, it tended to get it wrong. And what they learned is they had superiorly correlated snow with a wolf. And so the model wasn't really identifying the animal, it was identifying a snowy terrain and making that equal to a wolf. Similar example was in Africa, it was struggling to identify male versus female. And when they started really getting into the bias there, they discovered it was lipstick. And so since a lot of people in Africa aren't wearing lipstick, the model had learned that lipstick equaled woman, which of course is a bias that they really didn't want in the model. So it's really important to think about, what's the demographics I'm working with? What language areas do I need to consider? And then with some RAG technology, you could start feeding in extra information if you're dealing with like writing a policy or whatever. So using your own data, there are a lot of LLMs out there that have been custom. So as a presenter was talking earlier on medical, a lot of times there are LLMs that have been fed with medical terms. Additionally, like Microsoft has their security copilot, so they've fed it with a whole bunch of security firms. So if we think about, the quick brown fox, there's two scenarios here that if we're feeding in our own material, we may get two different outputs for it. So thinking, the security firm is going to be really more on the tactical alert driven, incident logs, perimeter breaches, security camera overlays. So it might start weaving that into its Fox analogy. Vice versa, a nonprofit focus on wildlife might put it into the context of, forest protection, here's the background. It tends to eat X, Y, Z, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I know we're pushing time, aren't we, Sue? So this, and the white paper I put together, and I have some references at the very end, I go a little deeper in choosing the right model. So GPT-4 is used both by Microsoft and by ChatGPT. It does have a limit of 128,000 tokens that you can put in. So when you're typing in your question, it can take text and images. And then you can see where it's been deployed. So this chart is by no means all of them. At the very end, I do have a reference where you can look them up, but choosing the right model. And what you're also now seeing is models that will actually help choose for you. You used to have to say, hey, I'm looking at an image, so I'm going to use this model. In Bing and ChatGPT, they'll actually look at what you're trying to do first and then determine if they're going to give you a quick response or a deep response. And a lot of times now you're seeing it beginning to collect information, work through the information, and then finally build your presentation. But think about perfect. So, yep. Actually, if we only stop at one thing, Stu, let's just go back to slide 11. Just quickly, if we can. Nope, slide 11. It should have been two past the model. We're going the wrong way.
Carl, what's the title of the slide?
Yeah, real world use cases.
It's just one more back.
Well, I'll start talking about real world use cases. So most of the people I saw were educators. So things that I've seen people do is with this lesson plan paste in, or the way I would prompt it is, hey, I have a student. I need you to be an educator. So I'm telling the learning model what I want. I need to build a lesson plan that has scaffolding for this student that is at a reading level, blah, 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 and needs XYZ. I'm going to give you the current lesson plan. Can you rewrite it for me? And then paste that in, and then it will generate you a new lesson plan. And then as you're looking at it, you might do a remix of that and say, hey, they really love dogs. Can you associate dogs into this lesson plan? And then it will rewrite it. On the grant proposals, especially people that are first coming out and looking for grants, you can actually have it, hey, what grants are currently open out there? What are the key things that I need to know about this grant? And just keep asking more and more questions as it starts building out. So that's where I'm seeing a lot of real uses, is giving it a lot more words, a lot more in-depth information. And then as it goes into that large language model and starts looking at the embedded vectors, it's able to find better matches, providing you with much better results. So the more you put into it, the more tokens, the better result you get out of it. And then finally, let's just jump to the last slide, resources. So here's a list of a few resources in the white paper that I put together. There's certainly a lot more. The Microsoft Responsible AI is a really good read. And then the LLM model directory talks about all the different LLMs out there. And then there's a leaderboard is the last one, and it's kind of showing you who's trending up or down. So
Thank you so much for all of these resources, and Carl's information is here on the slide as well. He has been incredible at helping us to be able to take this into some bite-sized pieces, and we've rushed a little bit today, but hopefully we'll get a chance to have you back to do a little bit more learning.
Absolutely. And judging by the sort of comment, I'll figure out how to do a little different delivery to make it a little faster and maybe sink in better. So I appreciate that feedback too.
Super helpful. Well, I'm going to move us into our last segment here. We've invited Lindsay to come. aiEDU is actually the sponsor of our learning series this fall and has been doing some really incredible work with a number of educational institutions and school districts and thought leaders, and have been at work for a few years now on the development of some frameworks, including some lesson plans and some things that educators can access. The resource archive that they've got is considerable. And I know for the educators that are here, if you have an opportunity to go, you can follow along from our toolbox. It links to their toolbox, and there's a rabbit hole of information and resources connected there. But since we had the opportunity, we asked Lindsay if she might come and tell you a little bit about the work that they've been leading for the last couple of years and give us a sneak peek at what AI literacy might look like in an elementary classroom. So for those of you that are joining us from other sectors outside of education, I find an elementary education unit to be particularly disarming. We all went through it at some point or another. You were in an elementary classroom, whether you're a student or you're still there learning this afternoon. And so I'll welcome Lindsay to tell us a little bit about aiEDU and get us back into an elementary activity. Lindsay there. Lindsay, can you hear us?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay,
Oh, nice.
thank you. I could tell that my test had failed when I said to give me a thumbs up if you could hear me, and I saw no thumb. So I'm glad that you can all hear me now. It's great to be with you. I'm just going to do as part of kind of my welcome and context setting, and it's not letting me advance the slide. So if you wouldn't mind moving forward to the next. Just an overview of who I am. So Sue gave me a great introduction and a great introduction to aiEDU. So thank you so much. Just by way of a little bit more background, I serve in the role of Senior Lead of National Programs at aiEDU. My background is listed here. We are a national organization, aiEDU, and I'll share a little bit about what we do in just a minute. But I'm based in Seattle, which is so fun. I love getting to support Washington state-based work. And I'm really excited to be on the call and with all of you today. So we can go to the next slide, and I'll share a little bit more about aiEDU. So I mentioned we are a national organization. I also like to share up front that we are a nonprofit. I think this is really important to our work as an organization because it allows us to be really mission driven. We do have a very lofty goal, as you can see here. Our goal is to make sure that all students, and I also say educators as well, are ready to live, work, and thrive in a world where AI is everywhere. So what does that look like exactly? And if you can go to the next slide, we kind of have three main buckets of our work, if you will: define, deliver, and catalyze. So in our define bucket, it's kind of what Sue was talking about related to our framework. So we spend a lot of time doing research, partnering with other organizations, talking to practitioners to really understand and define what AI literacy and AI readiness really means and looks like. We also do a lot of work to deliver that message. So through professional learning, through trainings, we do a lot of webinar series of our own, and also spend time with school districts around the country to provide high quality professional learning to them. And then this last bucket, catalyze, is something we've been leaning into a lot more lately. So we do a lot of work with state level agencies and other, governmental agencies to really help them think about the importance of AI literacy. And so we do some advocacy work in that space. And then we can go to the next slide. Okay, so, and then you can advance one more beyond this. Thank you. Okay, so Sue mentioned that I was going to talk a little bit about AI literacy and readiness. That is kind of the main purpose of our organization. We spend all of our time in this space. We do not focus on tools specifically or, tell districts which tools to use. Our focus is on helping students and educators build their foundational knowledge and skills to be able to access AI tools and to be able to access AI and thrive in this space where AI is everywhere. So actually, Carl's whole presentation is a great example of AI literacy. He helped all of us build our literacy skills by learning how AI works. So that was a great example. What I'd like for you to do is take just a second to kind of read these definitions. Oops, I'm going to have you go just one back, Sue, for a second. Just read these definitions on your own briefly. And then when Sue advances, maybe in about 30 seconds, I'd like for you to identify a word or a key phrase that stands out to you across these definitions, or that kind of differentiates these two definitions for you. So let's keep this up for about 30 seconds, and then we can go to the next slide. All right, do you want to go to the next slide? And actually, I wonder if they have Menti up, we could keep that those definitions on the screen maybe for a minute. Oh, that's okay. Okay, let's see if we can kind of see what words come up for everybody ethically. Yes, human advantage. Awesome. Critical, apply, self-advocacy, confidence, understand. I'm so glad that human advantage and ethically are coming to the front. I think that those are two really critical pieces of AI literacy and something we care really deeply about. One of the things I also wanted you to notice is kind of the difference between AI literacy and readiness. I think AI literacy is a term that many of you, I'm sure, have heard before. AI readiness may be somewhat new to you. And we like to think about these as kind of a progression, if you will. So AI literacy being kind of the foundational understanding, the foundational skills that are critical to understand how AI works. So exactly what Carl was kind of helping us through. AI readiness is that next phase where you understand how something works so well and you built some of those critical thinking skills and some of those kind of interdisciplinary skills to help you understand how to access and use AI in 10 years from now, 6 months from now, in a world where AI doesn't look the way it looks now. So our thinking is really that if we just were to focus on tools and helping students understand how to use the tools that exist today, they wouldn't really be ready to thrive in the world after they graduate. So we really need to help them understand those human advantage skills, those interdisciplinary skills, and how to apply those to their personal and professional lives. So AI literacy is important, critical, but if we just stay there, we're really not preparing kids for the future. So let's go to the next slide. And when I was kind of sharing what aiEDU is all about, I shared that one of the main things that we do is we define what AI literacy and readiness are all about. And one of the ways we've done that is by building a framework. And we just launched the second version of our framework actually last Monday. There are 4 different parts to this framework, which you can see in this graphic here. So the first 2 parts are competencies. So these are the skills, the knowledge that students and educators need to have in order to be successful with AI. Now, below that, you'll see the school AI readiness rubric and the district AI readiness rubric. These are actually rubrics. So if you are a school leader, you can go into the school readiness rubric and actually do a little bit of a self-assessment. As a school, where am I at in terms of building readiness in my building? And then same at the district level. So if you're a district, where am I at in terms of building readiness at the district level? And so what the framework really does is break things down into several different dimensions that you should be thinking about, or that leadership should be thinking about in order to build readiness. So let's go to the next slide. Because we strongly believe that students are always at the center. Sue, I'm gonna just have you go to the next slide. I'm going to skip over this one for time. Because we believe that students are firmly at the center of all that we do, you could see in that last graphic that we always drive back to our student competencies. So that's what we're going to kind of focus on right now. I'm going to ask you if you will indulge me in actually accessing the aiEDU's AI readiness framework. I know Sue mentioned it's in the toolbox. I'm also, if it's okay, going to just drop a link into the chat where you can grab it there. And the student competencies are on pages 11 through 15. And we're going to give you a couple minutes to just kind of scan it. You do not need to do a deep read. You can access this resource at any time after this session. But I want you to kind of think about, as you're reading, which competency feels the most critical for your students to master. And if you are not an educator, there are many ways to apply this to your work and your life. You could think about how this applies if you have kids, how this applies to young people that you are working with. So think about it from that perspective, whatever feels the most relevant to you. And then I want you to also think about which competency feels most connected to your organization's priorities. So let's take about 2 minutes to kind of scan, if you wouldn't mind. And then you may want to just like take a note to yourself on a piece of paper so that when we move to the next screen, you know, there you go, which competencies you are going to select. Oh, blocked because of Bitly. If it is blocked because of Bitly, let's see, I can put the full link in here. Hold on. You can also access it on our webpage or our website, but it will ask you several questions before you can download it. So I wanted to give you a shortcut. Oh, thank you, Sue. Okay, awesome. Yes. So much, as much as we try to stay away from the tools, I think one of the things, and this slide is really reflecting that we are hearing so much from districts right now is a real interest in helping educators and students understand the tools. And so even though we won't advocate for a particular tool, we do strongly believe that part of AI literacy is helping folks understand how to use tools safely, effectively, ethically, and then also how to make decisions. Like, how do we use tools? When do we decide which tool to use and when, so that we aren't kind of reducing the cognitive load that our students need to bear. That's really important to keep at the center. It's so interesting to see that these two, they use AI tools safely and effectively and then determine responsible use of AI, are coming up as like the main, main buckets of interest. Okay, let's think about this one. So which competency feels most connected to your school or district's or organization's priorities? Which one feels the most connected here? Oh, shoot. Awesome. Okay, so very similar responses, although I think the like be a lifelong learner, develop core content knowledge, those are coming out as well. So when we are working with school district leaders, one of the ways we use these competencies is to help them think about connecting the competencies to their portrait of a graduate or to their strategic plan. We really want to help systems think about how do you integrate AI literacy into your existing work instead of making it a separate thing. And so what I think that you see in these student competencies is that many of the skills are transferable. So things like critical thinking skills, those are things that we care about with AI implementation. We also care about them in our ELA classes, in our math classes, and in all of the other things that we do. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So and then you can advance to the next one. So we spent a little bit of time looking at the framework so that you kind of have a big picture sense of here are all the things that we think about when we are defining AI literacy and then moving into AI readiness. I want to now show an example of what that looks like in real life. So this is actually an example lesson plan. It's an elementary exploration, so it is actually meant to be done with 3rd and 5th graders, but I use this lesson all the time when I am training adults. And so I think it is really transferable and helpful to kind of understand machine learning and to understand how models are trained. So I'm going to ask you to kind of do it along with me. So let's go to the next one. So we're going to focus on how computers learn to sort. So what I'd like for you to do, if you have like a pen and paper, we're going to kind of do this old school. If you wouldn't mind kind of just taking some notes to yourself, since we don't have the time to go into breakout groups, I want you to think about if you have these objects, let's say they were on like cards and you were actually physically manipulating them into groupings. think about how you might group these objects and what your rule might be. Okay, so you're going to kind of do that on your own. And if it helps you to take a little bit of a note or to write down what your category might be or how you might group it, go ahead and do that for yourself on your piece of paper. And we'll take about a minute to think about this. All right, I'm going to give it about 15 more seconds, and then I'll have you go to the next slide. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. If you didn't get your categories perfect, that's okay. This is just to kind of simulate the experience. All right, so now you've been given a different grouping of objects, and I want you to think about how you might sort these objects into the categories that you created using the first set of objects. Okay, so you're going to be testing your rule by sorting a new set of objects. And I want you to think about here, did you have to change your rule? Is there anything in this set that doesn't fit into the categories that you created in the first slide? So we'll take maybe about 30 seconds or so here. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next slide, and would love your thoughts here. Did you have to change your rule? No. Okay, well, I guess that's probably 100% is misleading since it's only been a little bit. There you go. Okay. Awesome. All right, so almost half and half. I think what's really interesting is that a lot of folks that I will work with and do this thing with will have their categories be around colors, and then they get the second set and they see clear and they see silver and white, and it doesn't quite fit into those categories. I've seen like different use cases. So these are some reflection questions that would go along with this. What made sorting difficult? What made some rules better than others? Struggle with 2D versus 3D. This lends itself, both with adults and with students, to really engaging conversations around the idea of training a machine using data and the concept of bias, which Carl was talking a little bit about too. So go ahead to the next slide. And I know I'm kind of rushing through this and we're not getting kind of the full impact of this, but hopefully you get the sense that what ends up coming out of these conversations, and we can go to the next slide, is these kind of key ideas. So AI finds patterns. It's not a truth machine. LLMs do not know facts. They recognize patterns. Bias in leads to bias out. So AI can easily absorb and reproduce bias. For example, if it only sees round bottles, if we've only trained this machine on round bottles and it sees a square bottle in that whole, in the lineup, it's not going to recognize it as the bottle and it's going to sort it incorrectly. And then the importance of being critical users. This type of a lesson could take anywhere from 7 minutes to 30 minutes to more, and can be integrated. The idea is that it gets integrated into a teacher's existing curriculum and existing lesson. So let's go to the next slide. And then just like the last thing that I want you to think about is how might you apply a lesson like this to your context? And the next slide is just an opportunity to speak into that. And then I will close here. Yes, I love the getting people to think on AI is appropriate for all ages. Awesome. And don't be afraid to use elementary activities with older age students. Sometimes it helps break things down in a really accessible way that can be meaningful. Thank you so much for engaging. Always happy to share more resources or whatever. Feel free to get in touch, but I want to respect the time, and I know we're a minute over, so back to you, Sue.
We do have an opportunity in your Mentimeter slides. There's a slide there for questions for Lindsay, and I'm happy to be able to deliver those questions and help with follow-up if there's additional questions for her. I am going to go ahead and move us into our exit ticket, and then we can always come back, loop back with Lindsay if she's got a minute here. So we are wondering, after this very first AI in Action learning session, as you registered, you may have noticed that we asked you, how comfortable are you or how confident are you with AI tools and AI literacy? And so let us know after today's session, are you moving up on that slide or on that scale a little bit on the 1 to 10? How comfortable and confident are you with AI? Such a great bell curve. Look at that. This is wonderful. Wherever you are at, I just want to take a moment to celebrate wherever you are at. It's a learning journey, and we're grateful to have you be in it with us. And then I want to make sure that you know or remind you, oh, sorry, I forgot about this. We would love to know your biggest takeaway from today's session. And this is an important opportunity to give us some feedback about some things that you want more information on in later sessions as well. While you're typing your responses here about your biggest takeaway, I'll give you a sneak preview about some of the things I'm excited about. We've got some opportunity to show you a live vibe coding demonstration, which is one of the things that a lot of our students are talking about. A lot of industry is talking about how AI tools are being used to automate processes and help with development of code more quickly. We also have some tools coming to be able to help for those of you who are planning AI Hour of Code events in December. We'll have some tools and resources to support you with some activities that you can do with students and families to engage in learning with our education communities. We have some folks from Enterprise Solutions coming to share a little bit about some of the tools and automations that are disrupting workflows for small businesses. So a little bit of education, a little bit more industry planned, some demonstration, and this feedback is invaluable as we plan these sessions in community with you. And on our last slide here, I'll remind you that we have 2 more learning sessions. And so the next one is October 21st, same time. And then you also have on that AI in Action landing page, the toolbox where we will populate this recording, as well as a link to the aiEDU page and Dr. Adams' podcast and Carl's slides, both from the AI Expo, and then we'll get this recording and slide up today. So with that, I want to thank you for your time and your attention today. And if you are, one last reminder here. If you are hoping for clock hours for today's registration, we know we've been in partnership with a couple of the STEM networks, and there's a couple different instructions for clock hours. So you'll want to follow up with your specific STEM network if you are looking for professional development clock hours for participating today. And with that, thank you again, Adam and Carl and Lindsay, and we'll see you all soon.